Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us today. On behalf of the Online Events Committee and Young Scholars Committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special event of IAFFE. My name is Yazgı Genç, and I am aspiring feminist economist and graduate student at the University of Utah, and I'm currently serving on IAFFE's Young Scholars Committee and Online Events Committee, and I'm hoping to meet all of you at the IAFFE conference in June, either online or in person. Today's event is a special session hosted by IAFFE on the economic impact of overturning Roe v. Wade, and faced with the threat to the federal constitutional protection of the right to abortion in the United States, the IAFFE Young Scholars Committee and Online Events Committee are convening space for joint feminist reflection on the possible economic impact of overturning Roe v. Wade. This special section is co-organized by Online Events and Young Scholars Committee. We also hosted events on feminist economics research methods, building bridges series, and building a career as a feminist economics. The recording of these past events are available on IAFFE website and YouTube. Also, please keep an eye out for the additional events to come. I just want to briefly talk about the logistics for today's panel. So this event will be recorded and posted on YouTube. As this is a Zoom call, not a webinar, a friendly reminder to please keep yourself muted. And we will have a chance for Q&A later in the session, so feel free to put your question in the chat or use the raise hand function, and I will help to moderate those questions. Today's panel will be moderated by dear Ligia Sabagi-Fares. She's a core faculty member at Brooklyn Institute for Social Research and one of the many great people among the IAFFE's Young Scholar. She will be with you for the rest of the event, and I will be back during the Q&A session. So now I will leave the floor to you, Ligia.
Thanks, Yazgı. So I am very, very happy to be here today. And I'm very thankful as well. So it is a great pleasure to moderate the session to discuss the economic impact of overturning Roe versus Wade. And first of all, I really want to acknowledge the work of Yazgı and Noelia Sanatoria, who is also here with us today, for organizing this panel and getting us here today. They were amazing, like they put it all together. It was really great. And I really want to thank as well our speakers and introduce them to you all. So Yana Rodgers, professor in the Department of Labor Studies and Employment Relations at Rutgers University. Mayra Pineda-Torres, incoming assistant professor at the School of Economics at Georgia Institute of Technology. And Journey Cardenas, feminist activist and lawyer, former general director of public affairs in the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity of Argentina. Of course, I want to thank IAFFE, the International Association for Feminist Economics, to bring us all together, and you all who are here attending this event. We are looking forward to your questions at the end of the panel, so bear with us, and it will be great to discuss with you all. I'm Brazilian, and especially when I used to teach economics in Brazil, and some of my students would come to me and ask about abortion, what was my opinion, I would tell them that my feeling is that, so in Brazil, abortion is illegal, right? Like, except in case of rape and when it's like, there's risk for the mother. But so what I would tell them is that abortion happens and will continue happening because women need it. Women don't do it because, you know, they want to do it. So when it's illegal, what happens is, like, women who can afford to be assisted by expensive illegal abortion clinics, they get it like insecure, safe, more comfortable environment, while poor women, they do it at home in very precarious conditions, and their life may be at danger. So I think that's my particular opinion about what we're discussing today. I think what we're discussing today is like how abortion rights are a matter of reproductive economic justice. So with that, I would like to ask our first speaker, Yana Rodgers, our first question. So Yana, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I wanna ask you, like, we often discuss abortion as personal rights, reproductive justice, early autonomy, or more a moral question? What makes abortion an economic issue, and what could the consequences of overturning Roe for women's lives and well-being? Like, what would be the consequences? If you can also give like a brief overview of what's going on, the last updates, that would be great too. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ligia. And also I want to echo your thanks to Noelia and Yazgi for organizing this event. And just like you gave a little context for your own opinions, let me preface my comments by saying that I started writing about abortion in 2017 when Trump was inaugurated and reinstated the global gag rule. And that's when the US restricted all global health aid to any NGOs abroad that provided abortion services or counseled on abortion or even did advocacy on abortion. And that's when I started writing about abortion in the context of the global gag rule. And that in turn led to doing a huge scan of the literature. It was a major lit review with two scholars from the London School of Economics. We looked at everything published about the economics of abortion since the late 1990s and looked at the themes of those. We came up with, it was about 365 articles that looked at the microeconomics of abortion, the mesoeconomics, and the macroeconomics of abortion. And that's what I'll be talking a little bit about today in the context of today's talk. And this is a global literature. So just because the talk talked about Roe v. Wade, our talk today, our discussion is indeed a global discussion of abortion rights. But in the US, for those of you who haven't been paying attention to the particulars, just in a nutshell, recently there was a leaked document indicating that the Supreme Court is likely to overturn Roe v. Wade, which was a Supreme Court decision in 1973, granting women the right to have an abortion. And that federal right is now at risk. Although in the last few decades, states have been increasingly regulating women's access to abortion. And we've seen a host of creeping regulations on the right to an abortion. And that has led to fewer service providers, some clinic closures. And one study showed that as of the most recent date, we have data for 89% of all counties in the US have no abortion providers in their borders, and that's up from 77% in 1978. So women are already having to travel lots of miles in order to get an abortion, and this distance as a barrier to abortion has disproportionately impacted low-income women as well as women of color. And there are projections now that are shown on the Guttmacher Institute website. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, the enormous increases in distances that women from some states will have to travel in order to get an abortion. And that brings us to one of the major, microeconomic dimensions of these abortion restrictions, and that is the cost to women themselves. Not only, the pain that they have to endure and the emotional issues, but the financial costs of needing to travel more to get an abortion. There's travel costs in terms of distance, needing to stay in a hotel, having to find childcare, and losing wages. And this is because not only will they have to travel to get an abortion, but compounded are these other state regulations where they first have to get mandated counseling and receive a state-generated packet of literature, not all of which is factual, and stay up to 2 or 3 days after the counseling, then to be able to get the abortion. And that's in many states, even where abortion, is allowed. So those are some of the financial concerns, but compounded with that is these can cause unnecessary delays. And some people may have experienced delays that push the pregnancy into a later gestational period where abortion is riskier and more expensive to perform. And that could lead to health risks for women, including hemorrhaging as well as uterine perforation. And then we see at the meso level, these kind of restrictions also have costs to abortion providers. So at the meso level, we're looking at health services and providers. There's higher compliance costs with things like TRAP laws, targeted regulation of abortion providers. And in clinics in states where abortions are still going to be provided, they're going to have to deal with an influx of new patients seeking care. And even providing abortions at later gestational ages is costlier to providers. And we've also seen at the meso level, and this is a huge global issue, Ligia mentioned, access to safe versus unsafe abortions. There's been estimates that post-abortion care, in the case of unsafe abortions, is very expensive and can constitute an enormous part of public health budgets as well as government budgets. Providing post-abortion care is much more expensive than providing safe abortions. It's expensive for medical systems, it's expensive for governments. So immense health system resources are needed to treat complications from unsafe abortions. So those are just some of the examples of the costs, and I'll talk a bit more about the macroeconomic impacts in the next round.
Thank you, Yana. That was great. Thank you so much. So our next question goes to Mayra Pineda-Torres. Mayra, thank you so much for being with us. Mayra, you recently published a paper co-authored by Jason Lindo about the effects of mandatory waiting periods for abortion using the case of Tennessee's additional requirements. So you have some insights on what the effects of even small change in this is, right? So could restrictions, even if small ones, as they want to implement, so-called small, can affect the proportion of abortions obtained? And what can you tell us about the mechanism behind the economic effects of those small changes?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. And well, regarding the first question, in which I would say, like, have we learned or do we know if small changes, such as you refer, have impacts on abortion access and the number of abortions? The answer is definitely, and we have consistently seen this result in different studies. And this is a consistent finding for different types of abortion restrictions. So very briefly, like, we have demand side restrictions in the US, which with the demand, I mean they are targeting the patient. And this includes parental involvement laws, mandatory waiting periods, such as the one you mentioned in my study with Jason Lindo, restrictions on funding for abortion. And we also have the supply side restrictions that Yana just mentioned, which are the TRAP laws. And we have learned from different studies that these policies restrict abortion access in different ways. They are reflected, this finding is reflected in reductions in abortion rates. And ultimately, this is also reflected in increases in birth rates. So these are small changes in the sense that abortion legislation in the US, even though abortion is nationwide legal, each state is implementing their own policies. But we can see in specific cases in different states that they are impactful enough to see decreases in abortion rates and increases in birth rates. We know, for example, that parental involvement laws, which are targeting just teenagers, can decrease abortion rates by about 15 to 20%. We know that mandatory waiting periods also decrease abortion rates, even though they are not actually restricting abortion. Women can still get an abortion, but this waiting time, these separate visits for the clinics are so impactful, and the cost that they involve can be so large for women, particularly low-income women, that at the end the decision becomes not I want an abortion or not, can I afford the abortion plus all these additional costs or not? And you also mentioned, like, what are these different mechanisms behind the economic impacts that these small changes can have? Because so far I mentioned the health impacts of these policies, which is I cannot get an abortion, and therefore I may end up having a baby that otherwise I didn't want to have. But that's not the end of the story, right? Because having a child is kind of a chain of more events that will come after, and particularly if you cannot afford having that child and supporting that child. So in general, the way we think about these mechanisms in the literature is that the first one, the obvious one, is the fertility mechanism we all have in mind. As I mentioned before, I want an abortion. There is a restriction in my state that is not allowing me to access abortion services, or it's making it difficult or hard for me to have an abortion. So therefore, ultimately, I will carry this pregnancy to term, and carrying a pregnancy to term, having an unwanted child, may impact my economic outcomes if I interrupt or completely abandon my education and therefore my human capital investments. If I am not studying anymore, I may be working, but I cannot afford childcare. So therefore, I will have to leave my job forever or for a long period of time, lose that experience. And if eventually I want to join the job market again, I may be penalized, right? Which would contribute to this gender gap in wages we already observed. But there is another pathway or mechanism that was discussed a lot in the context of oral contraception in the US, when it became unmarried women could gain access in the 60s. And the idea behind that mechanism is that, I will put it in the context of abortion restriction, but is that facing abortion restrictions may change women's aspirations and expectations about the future, even if they are not currently facing an unwanted pregnancy. So the idea is that these restrictions may create uncertainty for women about their future ability to control their fertility. And therefore, this may change their aspirations and expectations about how much they invest in education, if they should invest or not, or in job experience, because eventually they may end up abandoning those situations. And even if they don't have the unwanted pregnancy at the moment, they may just stop investing in education, investing in human capital, investing in the labor market, ultimately changing these outcomes. But in the absence of these policies, they may have invested more. So these are some of the mechanisms, but definitely there are more. There are so many things, behavioral responses from women to these policies, that ultimately would affect their investments in economic outcomes.
Thank you, Mayra. Edurne, the next question is for you. So Edurne Cardenas, thank you for being with us. And I would like to ask you, like, why women in the US face the possibility of losing their constitutional right to have an abortion. Argentina's Congress recently approved a law that guarantees the right to abortion. What does it mean in Argentina's health system? And what does it mean that abortion now is legal, safe, and free? You're muted.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And for me, it's a pleasure to be here. So here I'm amazed by the previous presentations. And so following your question, I will talk about what happened in Argentina. And you know, the bill, you say like recently, for me, it's like alive. So the bill in Argentina, the bill of abortion in Argentina was announced weeks before the pandemic the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's alive, no, already. So as probably you know, the bill of abortion was a promise in the presidential campaign. So it was like a huge announce of the just elected president, Alberto Fernandez. And finally, so the bill was announced in March, and the law passed in December 2020, and then was ratified, etc., in early 2021. But before 2020, we had 2018. And before 2018, we had years of a national campaign. I think that the national campaign, this campaign, was launched in 2007, 2006. And before that, we had years and years of Encuentros Nacionales de Mujeres. And I think this is important, but because your question is what implies for the health system in Argentina. The law that passed is a product of years of learning experiences. And when we draft the bill, we bear in mind a lot of things that my colleagues that are already said in terms of what kind of barriers, what kind of delays, what kind of risk we could face with the law. This is something important to say. So we had years of experience when we were thinking the text of the law. So what implies? The law in Argentina is a national law. Argentina is a federal country. It's as Brazil, as Mexico, as the United States, Canada. It's a different system, but we are a federal state. So a national law establishes for us a floor, no, like a basis of equality for all the country, because Argentina is a huge country. It's a big country with a lot of differences, cultural, economic differences, etc. So it's important to have like a federal law to establish a floor. Another thing is that in Argentina, as a federal state, each province, at a local level, each province has its own health system. So what does mean that abortion is a right? The law in Argentina, the federal law, established that that abortion is a right, and it has consequences. The first of all is, as it's a right, it's an obligation of the state. So the state, federal, local, has to provide everything to make it not only possible, but also free and safe. And I think this is, regarding your question, this is what implies to have a law, is to have a right, and because it's a right, it's a state obligation, and the state obligation should be or must be in a way, how? Free and safe. Safe, what means safe? That is an obligation that must be provided following what the technique indicates. So following what the highest authority at the global level in health indicates. So it's not, the law not says it should be medical abortion. We say it must be safe. So what means safe? What safe mean? It will be like in develop in time. And free, it means that both at the public and private health system has to be available. In which way? In a comprehensive way. Like all the package must be available at the local level and the federal level, but also at the private and the public health system. In terms of rights, I mean, the law it's a very thank you. It's a very comprehensive law, because in the law we talk about rights, obligation of the states, and we try to tackle the possible barriers. So I wanna like stop here. So I'm responsible for the time and respectful for the rest of the people. But what it means for the health, I will say that it's an obligation of the state, and so it must be provided in the best ways.
Thank you so much, Adriana. This was very great. I go again ask Yana another question. So we say that the personal is political. However, does it mean that, what does it mean in the abortion question, right? That the personal is political. What are the macro consequences of abortion and of the abortion ban beyond the microeconomic sphere? Could these individual consequences have spillover effects to the whole economy, and how?
Yes, most definitely. And some of that answer Mayra already alluded to in her discussion. So there's quite a bit of evidence now, some of it produced by feminist economists, others by neoclassical economists, largely using regression analysis, linking abortion law with a number of outcomes at the macroeconomic level. So this research is showing that when women have more control over their fertility and unplanned pregnancy through liberalized abortion law, that leads to greater female labor force participation rates, higher educational attainment rates, and even, let's see, Kate, I see Kate Bond is on this Zoom call. Her paper in the special issue that we did of Feminist Economics, which talked about these issues, showed that occupational mobility improves with access to abortions. There's even a longstanding paper showing that lower fertility that's linked to abortion law liberalization is associated with higher GDP growth. We've seen findings showing that in the US, if you compare abortion law liberalization and access to contraception, it was actually abortion law liberalization that had a stronger effect on women's decisions to delay marriage and delay childbirth compared to the introduction of the birth control pill. So this access to abortion is hugely important. Some of the literature by neoclassical economists, men actually, a couple of decades ago, they looked at crime, and they found that the liberalization of abortion laws in the US across states, they were able to link that, and then Roe v. Wade, with a reduction in crime 18 years or later after the abortion laws were liberalized. We also see evidence from the US as well as other countries of greater investments in children at the macro scale. So the intuition there is with smaller family size, that parents invest more in the health and education of their children, especially girls. There's some evidence from a couple of lower income countries showing that if parents know that their daughters will have access to contraception as well as safe abortion, they're more likely to invest in the schooling of their daughters, because their daughters won't have to drop out of school in the event of an unplanned pregnancy. So there's these cross-generation effects going on. And the final thing I do want to mention is a number of studies coming out for the US on women who were denied an abortion because of gestational limits in the abortion laws. Women who were denied an abortion were more likely to be living in poverty, to raise those children in poverty, to need public assistance. They were less likely to be working full-time for years after they were denied an abortion. So these have employment effects. They also have, again, macro effects on public sector spending for welfare assistance for these women being more likely to live in poverty. So I think the bottom line is that integrating access to safe abortion into a full set of reproductive health services has societal benefits that are critically important. And it's also a human right as well as an economic issue for women and their families.
Thank you, Yana. Again, like I'm learning so much. I'm very thankful to all the presenters so far. And I'm gonna just continue asking Mayra another question. So Mayra, could these local restrictions that you just talked about, and actually you already started discussing this with us, or bans, like, would they translate in higher costs for women? And will they deepen economic inequalities? And especially, which groups do you think will be affected, or which they would be most affected, maybe? I mean, all women will be affected, but like, can we have like an idea of which groups would be most affected? What's your opinion on this?
So as I briefly mentioned, and actually Yana brought up to the conversation at the very beginning, getting an abortion is not just I pay for the procedure and that's the end of the story. There are a lot of arrangements that women have to make to get an abortion, and particularly in the current restrictive abortion landscape. As Yana mentioned, just reaching a facility for some women means traveling very far away. So let me give you an example of one policy, how costly it can be for women. A mandatory waiting period, which is a policy in which women have to take 2 separate visits to the clinic in order to get the abortion. In the first one, this is a counseling appointment in which they receive a lot of information. Then they have to wait at least between 18 to 72 hours, depending on the state, to get the second appointment, and finally they get the abortion. However, these 18 to 72 hours actually never happen, because just getting the first appointment takes a lot of time. And then getting the second appointment, which is conditional on the first one, also takes a lot of time. So as Yana mentioned, all these additional arrangements will be very costly for women because, for example, if they have to take time out of job, this would happen twice. And if they are hourly paid, then they are losing all those hours they don't show up to their job. If they, let's say they are not working, a woman is not working, but she has children already. So therefore she needs someone to take care of those children. And here in the US, childcare is very expensive. So if you don't have a support network that will take care of those children, who is going to pay for that, right? So that's, if you don't have someone to take care of your children, that's reason enough not to go somewhere, right? And also there is this trip to the clinic, these 2 trips, which take a lot of time. You have to pay for the gas. So we actually did a very simple calculation for a 1-week delay that the mandatory waiting period can create for women. And additional to the price of the abortion, this could be about $500 more. And this is very like a lower bound. It may be even more for women. So, and I will move on to the next part of the question. So who are the women affected the most? The low income women. Because if we consider the price of the abortion plus the price of all these additional arrangements they have to make, which would be something around $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. If you think of a family that is in the poverty level, this is their monthly income. So no one can afford an abortion, because if the decision is between eating and surviving a month or getting an abortion, they will go for the first one, right? And since the low income women are the most affected ones by these policies, and there are specific demographic groups that are an overall majority in low income women, which are women of color, we can expect them to be mostly affected by overturning Roe because they have been the ones mainly affected by small changes, such as the one I just mentioned. And this is not like a shocking finding. This is something that we have consistently seen in evidence about the impacts of abortion policy, coming both from legalization of abortion and also from the restrictions. When Roe was implemented, actually the women that benefit the most by this policy were Black women. White women also benefit from this policy, but the impacts, the magnitude of these impacts was quite larger for Black women than for white women. And it is the same story with abortion restrictions. They are often more impactful for Black women because this is the population group that has the higher rates of unmet needs for contraception. They are a population with higher rates of unintended pregnancy. And the combination of these factors plus the being in general more low income increases these barriers they face to access reproductive health care. So, well, just to summarize, low income on women of color, particularly Black women, are the ones that will suffer the most if Roe is overturned.
Thank you, Mayra. Yeah, I will have like another question for Edurne now. And you already started discussing this and talking about it, how advocacy and many years of advocacy was necessary for reaching the goal in Argentina, right? And I would like for you to discuss with us a little bit, how was this process? What advice would you share with people in the US and other countries as well that are either facing the possibility of their rights being restricted, like here, or they would want to organize towards getting this access to these rights, as you mentioned before. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have a recipe, but I think it's a matter of time, and also of, it's not time, it's like it's a learning experience from our errors, but also, I mean, we have been here. I'm talking from Argentina. We have learned from the US, from Mexico, what happened in Ciudad de Mexico, prior, what happened in Colombia, and all those years. And I will take like it's not a starting point, but I will say, I will choose this starting point of the campaign. The campaign started as a space to gather a lot of people from different places and allies from different places. And I would say scholars, university, public officers, physicians, unions, students. So when we are talking about abortion, we are talking about an issue of everyone, everywhere. And it is a strategy to tackle the stigma of abortion. And I think that the stigma of abortion is a key issue. It's key to drive the way to have the stigma versus the right to abortion. So we can talk about public about having an abortion, about caring for an abortion, about make a domestic arrange for having an abortion. It's not a secret. It's not something to feel shame of. So in terms of what we learn, I mean, we learn that we have to use every space public space, private space to talk about abortion. Abortion as a right, abortion as an obligation of the state, and abortion as a public issue. It's not private, it's a public issue. And so I will say all this, I mean, you in the US, you have like a huge story with, I mean, those studies that my colleagues already mentioned. I mean, it's evidence that must be put into the public discussion. So what we learned that it's a public issue. It's an issue to be a fight on the streets. I mean, the green wave is a wave on the streets. So abortion is a matter to be fight on the street publicly. And I would say that is what is important. And something that I like to mention is Argentina is a country with a large story of public demands and movements. And I will say the workers' movement, the human rights movement, the women's movement is part of a story and a history. It's a tradition. So put this tradition into this one, I think was the key, but it's not only. It's also the political decision, but the political decision is always pushed but by what is claimed on the streets. So I will say that.
Thank you, Adrienne, for your comments. And this leads me to our, it's a final question to all the panelists. I will ask the three of you to take up 2 to 3 minutes to share your comments about how do you think the academia can help to enforce, to stand for this fundamental right that's being lost in the US? And what is the role of advocacy? What is the role of grassroots movements, as Adrienne was already talking about in the case of Argentina? And looking internationally, could this ban in the US affect other countries? This is something that we were previously talking about. So yeah, if you could please share, maybe let's do it in the same order. Yana first, and then Mayra, and then Adrienne. Tell us a little bit about what you think on these questions.
I don't want to speak too long because we're running out of time, and I'd love to hear the discussion. And I already see great questions in the chat and a wonderful answer from Rebecca. Thank you. I would just encourage, for those of you looking for research questions, to start to write about this as an academic. Even, something like lit reviews can make a lot of, have a powerful impact, or original research if you can get data, write blogs, talk to reporters. I think they're eager to get quotes, but I encourage you to speak about the economics of abortion in your context, or in, a way that interests you. As one of the questions was, the personal is political and the political is personal. And I think we all can do something about that with our work. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mayra?
Mayra,
I'm sorry, Mayra.
It's fine. I would say that, I would speak from my experience as researcher. I've been very privileged of being able to study these topics. But I think sometimes as researchers, we forget that research may inform the public. We get so focused on academia that we forget that this is information that is of interest of a broader audience. And particularly a policy such as abortion policy has the potential of affecting many people, not just women, because having a child affects different people. So I think as a researchers, we should be more active of spreading our findings, our studies to a broader audience, and put it into the words that can be understandable and can be informative and interesting for the public, so that they have a more balanced and widespread knowledge from what they see on TV, what their beliefs are. So, well, that would be my answer.
Thank you, Mayra. Edurne?
Yes, I think that I'm reading some of the questions. One say, how do we move this conversation beyond academia? And I think that one of the challenges is to have conversations with others, not only our own cycle, no? And that's why I think that the experience from Argentina, I was trying to share with you a little bit of the experience of our experience. I remember I was part of the campaign, I think from the beginning, and after that, I started working at CELS. CELS is one of the, it's a human rights organization, it's the civil society too. And I remember the path, like abortion was always like an issue related to women, women's organizations, the activists, the feminist activists within the organization. And I think like one of the main things was like to expand the conversation and to gain allies and to the conversation. And I remember CELS started being part of the campaign too. So I think that one of the strategies should be to make the conversation around abortion more wide, to have conversation with others. Because I was saying previously, it's a strategy to fight to the stigma of abortion. Abortion is a topic related to health, related to economics, related to, I mean, it's, as Yana was saying, it's a human rights issue. So let's start talking about that. And another thing that I want to say related to the impacts for the region, I will talk about the region in the US. I mean, what happened in the US impacts in our region for sure, because it's a model. The US is a model for the region for bad and good things, but also the impacts in terms of the support for the strategies at the local level. I think the gag rule was tremendous for the organizations in the region. So for the region, it's important what's going on in the US, because also set up the discussion. And I hope we will not suffer like backlash from what's going on in the US.
Thank you, Edurne. I think we all hope that. I will. So thank you very much for sharing so far. I will open the floor to questions, and I will pass it to Yazgi to help us with the Q&A session. Yazgi, please.
Thank you so much for these great reflections regarding this important issue. So I will moderate the question. Please feel free to put your question in the chat or use the raise hand function. We have already one question. Dr. Stella, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, this is Dr. Stella. Greetings from Kenya. But now greetings from Kampala. I'm actually calling you from Kampala, listening in. Thank you so much for such an enticing, very educative conversation. My question usually comes in like a lot of the times, like I think one of Yana has actually replied on my inbox and said that we use these strategies, these academic researches to be able to influence WHO. But we must also understand that WHO recommendations are not legally binding. And so we must come back to our contextual our contextual countries and ask ourselves, how is it that we incorporate this within the local legislations, within the national legislations, for us to be able to ensure that, yes, women can actually access safe abortion at the same time that their lives can be seen and they can also contribute hugely to GNI and GDP. So I feel like there's a lacuna around there. It's not necessarily a question, but I would want to hear what the other speakers are thinking about how contextualizing that in a framework where there's an accountability channel. WHO is amazing, but there's no accountability channel around. It's not like WTO. Thank you.
Yazgi, do you want us to answer the questions one by one?
That doesn't matter. You can start answering.
Okay. I think where we can, as academics, use our research, this is where I have a little bit of experience, is one, as Dr. Stella Bossier suggested, we can influence the World Health Organization guidelines. And I was fortunate because of that research I did on the economics of abortion to be part of these discussions with the WHO, but also, again, with our advocacy and putting pressure against other institutions like the church, like conservative movements. We can help to inform discussions in the press, online. We can be part of social movements, demonstrations, anything to get more knowledge out there. And the more people who are fighting for the right to an abortion, and we see this happening, especially like our example countries today that we're talking about in Argentina, in Ireland, in countries where the Catholic Church has been very powerful, where conservative forces have been powerful. It's women's voices, people's voices, speaking from an informed opinion, as well as a human rights issue. I do think we can fight these conservative and religious forces that are trying to restrict access to abortion.
And I just want to add up that sometimes researchers are invited in litigation processes to act as expert witnesses. So I would say sometimes as academics, we restrict ourselves to engage in this type of conversations, but actually we have the information, right? And this, so I guess playing a more active role as academics and engage in this kind of litigation processes, in these conversations, could help to inform the audience on what are the impacts, what can we expect from certain policies, beyond opinions are more based on data and analysis. And I would say that's one. And the other one that can be relevant is, as I mentioned before, to make the information we have accessible. Because so as academics, we tend to read articles, but not the general population would read an article. So make our research available, make it free, because also having access to a journal costs a price that people won't pay, right? So make it accessible and in words that are informative and that are relevant for people, not just for other academics.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mayra. And I wanted to name drop one person in the US who's been influential like that, and that's Caitlin Myers at Middlebury University. She's done some research on the economics of abortion, but she spearheaded and led an effort to write an amicus brief to the Supreme Court about Roe v. Wade and the economics of abortion. And her brief was signed by a whole bunch of economists. There was a petition going around. So she did exactly what Mayra just said, using her some of her research as a brief, but it was largely, again, a literature review. That was the core substance of her brief to the Supreme Court. So I think that's a great example of advocacy by a researcher using even a lit review.
And I want to add, from the real experience in Argentina, during 2018, we had, I think, was 5 months of public discussion in the Congress to educate our representatives about those topics, hearing opinions from the right, from all the opinions. And I think it was a strategy to put into the table the opinions, like very formed opinions from economists, scientists, physicians, but also people who experience abortion. No, so I think that the key is to, as I said previously, to make the conversation more broad, to make the conversation for all. And I think that the scholars have like a huge power, because you have the time and you have sometimes the resources to produce the information and to produce evidence to make the conversation a meaningful conversation. And I think that it's important for our democracies. I mean, we are now talking about abortion, but we are talking about democracy, how the public debate, the public discourse is based on evidence, is respectful, and is a serious conversation. No? And I think that you scholars have a responsibility, but also a challenge, but also the power to provide with very useful tools for a better conversation, not only for abortion, but also for better democracies. Without pressure.
Thank you so much, all these great answers. Unfortunately, we are out of time in this Q&A session. That was a very brief. We're sorry about that. I leave the floor to Lydia to ask the final reflections of our panelists.
Thank you, Yazgi. So yeah, I think I would like to ask you for a final thought and maybe share what you think would be our next steps. But before passing on to you, I want to thank you all very much for all your inputs. This was amazing. I'm gonna use our discussion in like the courses that I teach from now on. I'm gonna tell all my students that they should watch this, and we have to discuss, because as you said before, like I think this is a matter of public affairs, public discussion, and this we need to use the room that we have to raise these questions. So thank you so much for everything. Yana, could you please share your final thought, maybe next steps? Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I think I just want to repeat what I said earlier, that access to safe abortion needs to be a key component of a full set of reproductive health services in every country around the globe. It's more cost effective and it's more fair to women and children and families, and it's safer overall.
I just want to say that even though if Roe is overturned, many women will lose access in their states, there are some states that will keep abortion accessible and legal. And I think there is something we can all do besides, like, not as an academic or as an advocate, as willing to help low-income women, which is support these organizations that help women, that financially support them to go to these states. These organizations already exist. And for example, the Bridget Alliance, the Haven Coalition, and also in other countries, there are these types of organizations. For example, in Mexico, there are these types, and this is a way to make a difference. Obviously, the impact won't be seen in the overall group of women that need an abortion, but you can make a difference for specific women who need it. So I think that's a good step we can all take to make it more accessible for women.
And thank you. And I would say that take the streets and make our voices like louder. Not only support the organizations, but I think that the challenge is to make this discussion a public discussion, and to say very loud, aborto legal ya. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. I guess we had like a perfect closing, like let's do the theoretical, the practical, the political, the economic. Let's take the streets. I think this was amazing. Thank you so much. I want to ask Yazgi to close our session, and I want to thank you all again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those last reflections and for all that you share with us today. There are many insights we can take away from today's session. Thank you also all for joining us, and please look out for the future events from IAFFE, online events, and Young Scholars Committee, and best wishes to you all.